final years of World War I, the Ottoman Empire, once the unrivaled ruler of the Middle East, collapsed. After centuries of domination, its lands were divided up by the victors of the war, Britain and France. In the Levant, this meant Palestine, a region that had been home to a diverse population of Arab Muslims, Christians, and Jews. But now it was up for negotiation. 3 promises were made, each one contradictory. To the Arab tribes, Britain offered independence through the McMahon-Hussein correspondence if they helped defeat the Ottomans. At the same time, it secretly signed the Sykes-Picot Agreement with France, dividing the region into spheres of influence. And then came a third, perhaps the most consequential. In 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issued a statement supporting a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This Balfour Declaration electrified the Zionist movement, which had been lobbying for international support. To the Zionists, Palestine was not just strategic, it was sacred. They believed they were returning to their ancestral homeland, a place referenced throughout Jewish scripture as the land promised by God to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jerusalem, the city of King David, the Western Wall, the last remnant of the Second Temple, these weren't just ruins, they were proof. Zionism wasn't just a political movement, it was a spiritual resurrection. A return to Zion was not only desired, it was divine destiny. But for the Arab population already living there, over 90% of the population, this felt like betrayal. They had never been consulted. Britain now faced the impossible: how to honor promises made to Jews and Arabs without alienating either. The stage was set for confrontation. After the war, the League of Nations awarded Britain the mandate for Palestine, tasking them with preparing the territory for eventual independence. But the question lingered: independence for whom? Throughout the 1920s, Jewish immigration surged. Zionist organizations acquired land, often displacing Arab tenants. New settlements emerged, along with schools, newspapers, and agricultural collectives. To Jewish newcomers, this was redemption, a physical and cultural revival. Hebrew, long confined to prayer, returned as a spoken language. Biblical names were revived. A new society was being born. For many Jews, their arrival wasn't colonization, it was prophecy. The Psalms had foretold their return. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. This wasn't just about land, it was about identity, memory, and faith. But to Arab Palestinians, the demographic shift felt like an invasion. Their lands were shrinking, their political rights denied, and their warnings ignored. In 1929, violent riots broke out in Hebron and Jerusalem, leaving hundreds dead. British forces struggled to maintain control. Meanwhile, in Iran, Reza Shah Pahlavi was pursuing a secular modernization campaign. While Iran had no involvement in the Palestine issue yet, it watched British imperialism with growing suspicion, an attitude that would later influence its position on Israel. As the 1930s began, frustration hardened into rebellion, and Palestine moved closer to the brink. In 1936, after years of growing resentment, the Arab population launched a general strike and armed revolt against British rule and Jewish immigration. This Arab revolt would last for 3 years, marking the first true Palestinian nationalist uprising. In response, Britain proposed partitioning the land. The Peel Commission in 1937 suggested creating separate Jewish and Arab states. The Jewish leadership accepted the idea, cautiously. Arab leaders, however, rejected it completely. To them, dividing Palestine to create a state for a population that had only recently arrived, and with foreign backing, was unthinkable. At the heart of the dispute was Jerusalem, holy to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. For Jews, Jerusalem was the eternal capital of the biblical kingdoms. For Muslims, it housed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. Partition meant slicing through sacred ground, and neither side would accept losing it. Then came World War II. As the world focused on Hitler, Palestine fell quiet. But Zionist efforts didn't stop. They lobbied the Allies and trained underground militias, preparing for a state that had not yet been born. The war's aftermath changed everything. 6 million Jews had been murdered in the Holocaust. Displaced survivors flooded into camps, stateless, voiceless, and desperate. In 1947, the United Nations passed Resolution 181, a new partition plan. It allocated 55% of the land to the Jews, who made up 33% of the population at the time. The Jewish leadership accepted it. The Arab League condemned it. And history turned. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the birth of the State of Israel. The declaration came just hours before the end of the British Mandate. By morning, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon had invaded. Israel was outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But its defense forces, once underground militias, fought with urgency and experience. Through a series of campaigns, Israel not only repelled the invaders, but also expanded its borders, claiming more territory than the UN had granted. For Israelis, this was not just military victory. It was divine vindication. A people exiled for 2,000 years had returned. Psalm verses were cited. Prophets were remembered. The dream of Zion had become real, not in prayer, but in law. But for Palestinians, it was a catastrophe, the Nakba. Over 700,000 were displaced. Villages were destroyed, borders redrawn. Their homeland was now a foreign flag. By 1949, Israel was a recognized state. The United States and the Soviet Union offered immediate recognition. Iran, under the Western-friendly Shah, also extended de facto recognition, quietly maintaining economic ties with the new Jewish state. But beneath the calm, the region simmered. The issue of refugees remained unresolved. Jerusalem was still divided, and the next war was only a matter of time. With the 1949 armistice agreements, Israel was no longer a dream. It was a reality. But that reality came with new frontiers, new enemies, and unfinished business. Among the most pressing was the fate of Palestinian refugees. Over 700,000 people displaced into Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and the Gaza Strip, which now fell under Egyptian control. Meanwhile, Jerusalem was split. The western part was claimed by Israel. The eastern part, including the Old City and Al-Aqsa Mosque, remained under Jordanian control. Jews were cut off from their holiest site, the Western Wall, and many vowed that this too would change. To the Jewish people, the absence of Jerusalem from the State of Israel felt incomplete. Psalm 137 echoed in their memory. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. The city remained both a symbol and a battleground. Though there were no major wars during the 1950s, border skirmishes increased. Infiltrations from Palestinian guerrillas, supported by neighboring Arab states, prompted Israeli retaliation. Amid the regional hostility, Iran under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi quietly engaged Israel through arms trade, oil exports, and intelligence cooperation. It was a pragmatic alliance. Two non-Arab, Western-leaning nations encircled by unstable neighbors. Then, in 1956, the Suez Crisis erupted. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. In response, Israel allied with Britain and France to invade Sinai. Though militarily successful, international pressure forced a retreat. Tensions never truly subsided. And in June 1967, after weeks of escalation, Israel launched a preemptive strike, beginning the war that would change everything. The Six-Day War of 1967 was swift and brutal. In under a week, Israel captured East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. The Green Line was erased. A new Middle East was drawn. When Israeli forces reached the Western Wall, soldiers wept. For the first time since 1948, Jews had access to the most sacred site in Judaism. Religious Zionists hailed it as a miracle. Secular Zionists saw it as strategic triumph. Jerusalem was now declared the undivided capital of Israel. But the victory brought new problems. Over 1 million Palestinians now lived under Israeli military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza. Discontent simmered. Resistance grew. Settlements expanded, and international condemnation intensified. Meanwhile, Israel's covert alliance with Iran continued to flourish. Iranian oil fueled Israeli industry. Israeli arms were quietly exported to Tehran. Intelligence sharing was routine. Yet beneath the surface, Iran was changing. In 1979, the Islamic Revolution swept away the monarchy. The Shah fled, and Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini declared Israel an enemy of Islam. Iran went from Israel's silent partner to its most dangerous ideological rival, and it didn't stop at words. It began funding militant groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, and laying groundwork for influence in Gaza. A new front in the conflict was emerging, one where Israel's battles would be waged not just with armies, but through proxies and ideology. By the 1980s, frustration in the occupied territories reached a boiling point. In 1987, the first Intifada erupted. Young Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank took to the streets, throwing stones, erecting barricades, and confronting Israeli soldiers. Amid the chaos, a new political force rose from within Gaza, Hamas. Born out of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas rejected negotiations, Oslo, or compromise. Instead, it embraced armed resistance and found an eager patron in Iran. Iran began funding, training, and arming both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. For Tehran, these groups were not just allies, they were instruments of proxy war against Israel, positioned directly at its doorstep. The Second Intifada, 2000 to 2005, was even bloodier. Suicide bombings, tank raids, targeted assassinations. Gaza became a war zone. Israel responded with airstrikes and incursions. The peace process collapsed. Trust eroded. In 2005, Israel made a controversial move. It withdrew unilaterally from Gaza. Settlements were dismantled. The hope? Reduce friction, end direct occupation, open a path to peace. The result? A power vacuum, one that Hamas would quickly fill. In 2006, Hamas won elections in Gaza. A year later, after a brief and brutal civil war, it ousted its rivals from the Palestinian Authority and took full control of the Strip. Since then, Gaza has been under siege, blockaded by Israel and Egypt, economically strangled, and politically isolated. But Gaza did not fall silent. Backed by Iranian missiles and money, Hamas and Islamic Jihad began launching rocket attacks deep into Israel. In return, Israel responded with repeated military campaigns in 2008, 2012, 2014, and beyond. These weren't isolated battles. They were part of a larger game. While Israel and Iran never exchanged fire directly, Gaza became their battlefield. Every rocket, every drone, every tunnel was a message. We are watching. Meanwhile, Israel's military conducted covert operations across the region, assassinating Iranian scientists, striking weapons convoys in Syria, and launching cyber attacks on Tehran's nuclear program. And so, the original Israeli-Palestinian conflict has grown into something far more dangerous: a geopolitical standoff, a religious rivalry, a proxy war with global implications. The story of how Israel became a country is not just a timeline of wars and treaties. It is a story of faith, trauma, resistance, and survival, of promises made and broken, of allies turned rivals, and battles that stretch far beyond the borders of any map. In the middle of it all are people. Families in Gaza, worshippers in Jerusalem, and leaders in Tehran, each shaped by history and shaping it in return. And while the past may be written, the future remains uncertain. If you found this documentary helpful in understanding a deeply complex issue, then we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us bring more historical stories like this to you, and it supports independent, research-driven content in a time of noise and disinformation. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay curious.